Hi, I'm Amanda, and for the last 10 or so years, I've been involved in research into latent finger marks. So, when I say finger marks, what I'm specifically referring to are the imperfect, so smudged or incomplete impressions of the fingertip ridges that you would leave on a surface through normal day to day contact. And fingerprints would refer to more deliberate impressions or the actual whole pattern. And now that I've said that, I will mix the two up a lot. So, the idea of using finger marks as a form of forensic evidence goes back to around the end of the 19th century. So, around this time, one way of identifying someone would be to use the Bertillon system. Now, the Bertillon system was invented by a French criminologist called Alphonse Bertillon, who, amongst other things, invented the mugshot. Now, his system of identification involved taking around a dozen or so different measurements of someone's physical features. So, things like the width of the skull and the length of their limbs, and this was actually intended for use in prison or custody systems where someone would be brought in, you'd suspect they were using a fake identity, and you whip out the measuring tape and start having a bit of an investigation as to whether or not they were lying. So you had to have the person physically present, which when you're investigating a crime scene doesn't always happen, and also you have to be really accurate with the measuring tape because too much error and you're going to get a lot of false positives or false negatives. So around this time, a series of different researchers all started puzzling over, could we use our fingerprints as a form of forensic evidence, because they're unique to the individual, they don't change over your lifetime, and around the early 20th century, these actually started to become used in a variety of different jurisdictions in the UK and Australia. The first use of fingerprints to solve a murder was in about 1904 in Argentina, I believe. So the forensic discipline of fingerprint identification has been around for about 120 or so years, and during this time, we've developed a wide array of different techniques to find latent or invisible finger marks that are left at a crime scene. So, if you've ever watched any sort of crime show, then you'd have seen the actors using powder or maybe some sort of chemical technique to make the finger marks visible for comparison. So, in my line of research, what I specifically look at is the chemical composition of the residue left behind on a surface, because there are still a lot of questions about this when it comes to detection of finger marks. So, one thing is what is actually in the finger mark that we might not be exploiting, that we could be for use as a detection technique, or what actually happens over time. Is this technique we're using not working because the finger mark is too old, and could we develop something to overcome this problem? So these are the kinds of questions that a lot of different researchers all around the world are looking at. Other questions that they're looking at are things like, okay, so we can't get an identification from this print, but could we determine something like their sex or their age, or whether or not they've been using cocaine, for example? These things can be so at some extent we can look at these things. The identification of drugs is fairly easy. Identification of someone's biological sex, not so much. There's a lot of overlap. Another avenue of research is age estimation. So if someone said, yes, I did handle this knife that was used in the murder, but a week prior because I was cooking, can we verify the statement? Can we estimate the age of the finger mark and say, oh, yes, perfectly innocent, just was cooking the week before the murder, just a coincidence? Um, I've got a few questions from the librarians to answer as well. So one question was, can we make an identification from a partial fingerprint? Can we get a lot of information from that? And really that depends. So a lot of different factors, such as what part of the finger mark have you actually got to work with, what's the condition it's in. It really depends. Sometimes you can get an identification, sometimes you're best off playing it safe and saying, no, sorry, we can't get any information from that. Another question I've had is, can you get DNA from a fingerprint? And yes, you can. We've got techniques now that are sensitive enough that you can pull a full profile out of a finger mark, but you would use that more for major crimes such as homicide rather than volume crimes such as burglary, because there's always a massive backlog in the DNA lab as it is, unfortunately. Last question was, is fingerprint detection anything like you see in a crime show? No, it's not. It's definitely not. In a crime show, unfortunately, they're able to use techniques that are much faster and much more showy than they are in real life. So often it's not quite reflective of reality. So I hope that was interesting and that you enjoyed that. And I really hope that I'll be able to come to the library and give a talk in person at a later date. All right, thank you.